Today, we meet Vincent Kelly, who at the time of this strategic decision in 2002 had just moved to Sydney from the UK to become Managing Director of Bulmer's Australian business. Bulmer supplied alcoholic beverages in several markets globally. In Australia, their core product was Strongbow cider. At its peak, Strongbow sales saw profits of $15 million annually, but it had seen a decline to where it was barely profitable. After years of only supplying Strongbow to the Australian market, Bulmer's embarked on a diversification strategy which introduced agency beers and RTDs, along with an innovation line which included some really unusual drinks. Overall, Bulmer's business in Australia was going south. Vincent's primary goal was to turn Bulmer's Australia around. After analysing the internal and external environment, Vincent made the decision to cut the new product lines and focus solely on their Strongbow cider. But this wasn't enough. Strongbow had a very poor social image. After several focus groups, it was determined that the cider itself tasted great, but the product packaging contributed heavily to its poor image. A revitalised packaging was developed, which was well received by both retailers and drinkers. This elevated the social image and drove increased sales, which exceeded even the most optimistic expectations of Vincent.
The strengths of the business were that it really knew how to make good cider. It was good at sourcing it, it was good at producing it, and it was good at physically getting it to market. The weakness of the business were twofold. One, it taken its eye off the ball on its main business, and secondly, it had started to diversify the product portfolio. It depends how you look at the industry. If you take the industry as cider, it was in a very strong position with its market share, but it had a lot of substitutes in terms of RTDs, beer, wine, and various other alcoholic and indeed even other non-alcoholic products. If you take the industry as alcoholic products, then it had an extremely small share and no market power at all, because the category had become one that retailers could go with, but if they didn't have it, it was not the end of the world because the category was so small. There'd been a big change that had a dramatic effect on the core cider business, and that was from a taxation change 2 or 3 years before the introduction of GST that had brought down the retail price of ready-to-drinks of RTDs. Previously they'd been taxed as a spirit, they were now taxed more like a beer, and cider was taxed as a wine, which was a favourable taxation treatment, and this change in the RTD tax meant that RTDs were now much closer in price to cider, and therefore those shoppers who may have been looking to buy on more of a price platform had some real serious alternatives. I did that, I made the recommendation, decision, and took the action to do that because the business was trying to do too much. The first thing that it had to do was sort out the cider business and make the cider more appealing to consumers and the trade than it was, and that required all of the organisation's efforts to do that. The agency beer business, the agency RTD business, and the innovation lines had not taken off, and they were a considerable drain, not only on the frontline team, but also on the executive team and myself in managing all of those stakeholders, and we just did not have enough resources to try to get those products to take off. So it was focused on the core business. So the actual liquid, the product that the people consume, had high consumer acceptance. When we asked consumers what they felt about drinking cider in terms of product enjoyment compared to drinking RTDs or drinking beer, we were all in a similar position. However, where they did struggle was the image that cider had and it was a down market image compared to the image that they felt that they would enjoy and reflect upon them when they drank beer or when they drank RTDs. And the big driver of the negative image was the packaging. The packaging of the cider brands that we had, and indeed of any other cider brands in the market, had not kept pace with the developments that had been seen in RTDs and indeed in beer. And that was the outer case, the tertiary packaging, the secondary packaging, the six packs, and indeed the primary packaging, the bottle. Although a few years previous, the business had invested in upgrading the bottle and the design and the label, and when we took that to focus groups, they liked the bottle, they liked the primary packaging, but not the secondary packaging, and certainly not the tertiary packaging. Both the secondary and the tertiary were plastic in plastic, so shrink wrap in a shrink wrap. The first strategy we looked at to turn around the business performance, which was heading towards zero profit, was could we get the agency beer lines, could we get the agency RTD lines and the innovations to work? Could we get all three of them to work? Could we get one of them to work? And none of my team and indeed myself had any confidence in those products as being potential winners in the market. So hence the decision that I made the recommendation and my team supported, and that we made to focus just back on the core cider business. Was to run those options and our thoughts past them. So we're running as a four-line business. Could we do that? No. Could we run as three? No. Could we run as two? No. But there was a lot that we could do with the one line of cider, and then showing them what the substitutes were doing in terms of their packaging, and getting them out into the market so they could see when they went into bottle shops, into stores, and saw how premium the substitutes looked for often the same or indeed a lower price. They understood that in the Australian market, that the secondary and the tertiary packaging were very important, particularly as people often looked at product from a tertiary case point of view, but then maybe bought a six-pack or a bottle. We set ourselves, because when the strategy was about upgrading the secondary and tertiary packaging, that meant that we had to spend money on packaging equipment and also on the physical packaging itself. But we didn't feel we were in a position to take a price increase at that time, so our cost of goods went up. And therefore, to get back to the same profit that we would have had, which first of all would have been break even, and not be worse than that, we had to have a considerable increase in volume. So we set that as we will be no worse off than we will be if we do nothing, as the bottom hurdle rate, and then we had obviously other hurdles if we did even better than that, and we exceeded all of those, and in fact it went beyond our expectation, both in terms of initial trade customer acceptance of what we were doing, and then the sales results that we and they enjoyed. No, we did not have to make any modifications. It was working very well.
Well, there you have it. Bulmer's strategy to revive its business. While it looked simple, it was based on robust foundations, but there was also a level of serendipity involved. We'll now critically analyse the strategic process, looking at the strategic position of Bulmer's, the strategic choices that were made, and how they were put into action.
For any strategic decision to be made, an understanding of the strategic position is first required. We can see from the interview that Vincent has gone through an analysis of the company's internal strengths and weaknesses, and also looked at the external environment from a Porter's 5 forces and pestle perspective. From this, we have created what we believe Bulmer's SWOT analysis might look like. One point we would like to make here is that it is important to not define the industry scope too narrowly or broadly. In this circumstance, if Vincent was to only use the cider industry as the scope, it may have shown they were in a strong position. However, looking at the wider alcoholic industry, it displayed a more realistic position which enabled them to formulate an effective strategy. We will now look at the strategic choices to see if they align with the strategic position of Bulmer's at the time. Did these choices make sense? The first decision that was made was to focus on Strongbow and to cut the other product lines. This is known as retrenchment. Looking back on the SWOT analysis, we can see that over-diversification was causing Bulmer's to lose focus on their core capabilities, which was their cider product. Historically, Strongbow had performed well and they had value chain strengths in production and distribution. Bulmer's experience in the other product lines was weak compared to the historical capabilities developed over time with Strongbow. They also had no past success in these other products. In this case, the history of Strongbow could be said to have been used to legitimize the strategic move to focus solely on cider. From the VRIO perspective, the cider liquid itself could be seen to be Bulmer's resource that provided the most value to customers. As Vincent noted, the customer enjoyed the cider product itself, but its social perception was poor due to other factors and they were losing business to beer and RTDs. By cutting the other product lines, Bulmer's was able to provide the organizational support required to exploit and deliver the value to the customer.
With both the threat of substitutes and bargaining power of the buyers being high, Strongbow needed to improve its image and differentiate itself in an extremely competitive market. Based on the focus group research, the secondary and tertiary packaging was seen to be the major contributor to the poor social image of the product, providing the foundation for Bulmer's next strategic choice, the redesigning of the packaging. The value proposition for customers was perceived to be poor. Not only was the packaging a problem, but it also had poor product placement on the retailer's shelves. Bulmer knew they had a good product, but it just wasn't being bought. The non-financial costs of being seen to drink the product overcame the benefits of enjoying it. Looking at it in terms of the customer perceived value model, changing the packaging provided an image benefit to the customer, while reducing customer time and psychological costs. Reduced time costs came from the simpler packaging, and reduced psychological costs from an improved social image. The strategy employed by Bulmer's was a differentiation strategy, although one which we believe they didn't really intend. As Vincent noted, the packaging update brought Strongbow up to par with these beers and RTDs that had a better social image. The packaging, while reinvigorating the product, merely brought Strongbow up to parity with these products. What this caused, however, was for Strongbow to become relevant again. And by becoming relevant, Strongbow itself became the differentiated product in a red ocean market flooded with beers and RTDs. In the cider space, there was little competition, and what competition existed remained stuck in the prior decade and stayed irrelevant. Looking at the Anself matrix, Bulmer's were looking to increase their market penetration with their existing market and their Strongbow product. While this was achieved, it could also be argued that by raising the social profile of the cider product, they also created a new market for Strongbow. Consumers that never would have considered the cider previously due to its social image now had another option, and using this measure, it could be said that this strategy also created a new market for Strongbow.
While the strategy was deemed successful by Vincent based on exceeding projected sales hurdle figures, this seemed to be the only metric by which success was determined. Given social image and acceptance was a major barrier to Strongbow's previous sales, we propose this also should have been measured by non-financial metrics. Marketing metrics such as take rate, or the golden marketing metric which asks, would you recommend this to a friend, could have been employed, the latter measuring future sales figures from not only Strongbow's current network, but also from associated networks. Once implemented, Bulmer's made no modifications to their strategy. However, what can be taken from their efforts is that core competencies are critical to a company's survival. Bulmer's introduced Horizon 2 strategy with agency beers, RTDs, and the renovation line, but took their eye off their Horizon 1 core competency in cider. Resources weren't sufficient to spread across both horizons, and as a result, both suffered. This doesn't mean Bulmer should never revisit this strategy. staying dormant in a highly competitive market can only lead to one result. However, by learning from their previous failures, Bulmers can use this to their advantage when they next look to diversify. One way they could diversify is to employ an external rather than organic growth strategy. This employs additional resources and capabilities and doesn't come at the expense of resources dedicated to the core Horizon 1 activities, thus negating the issues with their first diversification attempt. Overall, we've seen a strategy that was well thought out. It utilised many strategic and marketing models to work through the 3 phases of strategic decision making and execution. We did feel, however, that more metrics were required to determine the true success of Strongbow, particularly non-financial metrics, to gauge the purported improved level of social acceptance. We also believe the serendipitous side effect of Strongbow becoming a differentiated product in a very competitive market played a large role in its success. However, as the saying goes, fortune favours the brave.